episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with a really fascinating guest for you again today, helping to create a unique tomorrow on many different fronts. As a little background to today's show, we start off with the definition of something that's esoteric, which is something that is intended for or likely to be understood only by a small number of people with very specialized knowledge or interest. The concept of the term esoteric originated a couple thousand years ago in 2nd century, based on the ancient Greek adjective esoterikos, defined as belonging to an inner circle. And the term esotericism ultimately came into use in the wake of the Age of Enlightenment and its critique of various forms of institutionalized religion, during which various groups began to dissociate themselves from dominant religions of the time. In the West, esotericism has pervaded various forms of philosophy, art, religion, literature, music, and esotericism and esoteric studies can include Gnosticism, yoga, alchemy, magic, spiritualism, astrology, meditation, mysticism, and so forth. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Christine Morgan, who is both president and chair of the Lucis Trust, which is an organization that promotes the education of the human mind, ultimately towards the recognition and practice of various spiritual principles and values, upon ultimately which a stable and interdependent world society can be based. And we're going to be getting into a lot of very interesting topics with her. So Christine Morgan, welcome to our show today.
Oh, thank you, Ara. I really appreciate the invitation. Just to say a few things about the esoteric side of where humanity is really heading in many ways. We seem to have gone through all the knowledge aspects and we're doing crazy things, climbing mountains and jumping off them. And basically, we should be exploring more inner space. And really, that esotericism is really just the hidden side of things, the meaning and the purpose that lies behind the outer forms. So, it's nothing that obscure in a sense. But it does require research.
Absolutely. And I look forward to getting into a lot of those themes with you. Christy, I'd like to start off, I've spent some time, watching many of the Lucis videos, and I know you have different lecturers and so forth, different times, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds, science, history, and so forth. Talk a little bit about yourself, if you will. You can take a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself, sort of your background, where you grew up, how you got involved with the organization. I think that'd be a great way to sort of lay the groundwork for what we're going to be studying.
Sure. I was actually born in South Africa and came across the Alice Bailey teachings when I was about 21. And my mother introduced me to them. And we sort of went into the Arcane School, which is an esoteric school of meditation training together. And at different periods, obviously. But that's how I started living in apartheid South Africa. And really, it was quite a depressing, obviously, time and oppressive environment. And at that age, I just thought, gosh, surely there's something more to life. And I read a near-death experience book first, and that really awakened me. And in Johannesburg, I went to a full moon meeting where there were a group of Alice Bailey sort of readers and students and people of other philosophies as well. And I started doing that meditation. And then I joined the school from there. So the great thing about the school is that, it's not a physical school and you can be in any part of the world. So that's what started my interest. And just before Mandela and the ANC were elected in 1994, I was invited to take up a position in the Arcane School in London, which I did. And I then became Secretary of London and then in 2012, president of the Lucis Trust. And basically that just means working through a board of trustees, a small board, and 3 headquarters groups, London, New York, and Geneva.
Mm-hmm.
And we're independent financially and legally, should we say.
Okay.
But in every other respect, we liaise and agree to our way forward, and share the same newsletters and letters and seminars and seminar topics. We do different seminars
Yep.
and conferences. But yeah, so that's really that in a nutshell, really. I've been with the school and the trust for most of my working life in one way or another.
You mentioned obviously the teachings of Alice Bailey, and obviously several of the volumes sitting there behind you. Her teachings obviously go back. I've spent, well, I'm not the expert here. I spent a little time. Obviously, there's this Tibetan disciple who based more on Tibetan mysticism, this concept of ageless wisdom. I was raised as a conservative Jew. I became a Reformed Jew, and obviously we in the Jewish world, we have Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism and some other forms. No, I'm no expert on Tibetan mysticism, but could you walk us through a little bit I don't mean for you to give an hour-long lecture, but take us back a little bit to the concept of ageless wisdom, the Tibetan connection, and a little bit of who Jawal Kuhl was and related to Alice Bailey.
Yes, sure. Well, I'll do it in relation to Alice Bailey, because the books were given out in her name, and the intention was that they stayed in her name. But at some point, somebody let it slip that the Tibetan was involved in transmitting the teachings to her. And the only reason why he didn't want his name on it, because he didn't want people to follow them and agree with every word in them, because he was an adept or a master of wisdom. So that was why, as we moved to a more Aquarian group consciousness and way of thinking, and for people's free will, which is so important that they think for themselves, he didn't want it to become yet another dogma, these 24 books. But just to start really at the beginning with Alice, she was born in 1880 and in Britain. She was from a quite a wealthy family, aristocratic family, and she was very, very Christian in every way. And at one stage, I think she was about 15 or something, she was alone in the house, and a man with a turban came in through the door and unannounced and told her he had very important work for her when she should behave herself and really get herself, stop being spoilt and sort of get herself together for this great project. And so I think she just assumed that was Jesus or somebody. But in fact, it was another adept who she would contact a couple of times during her life. But after that, she continued to be a Christian, very much evangelical, I think, Christian. She went to India and she met her husband there, working with the British Army. And they eventually got married, and he went to America. He was a priest, and together they had 3 children. And unfortunately, he became, I don't know why, but he sort of changed his nature somewhat, and he got very violent and towards her over a period of time. And in the end, they divorced. And, being from a very wealthy background and Victorian era in that sense, she had no training, she had nothing. She had 3 children to look after, she had no money. And her parents died at a very early age as well. So she had no backup, and she worked for a canning factory in Southern California, sardine canning. So it sort of shows the life of discipleship, that you are thrown in the deep end, you have every experience, and was at that low point that her transformational work began. And she came across two pupils of Madame Blavatsky, of the Theosophical Society, and they took her through the secret doctrine and various teachings, which she picked up and she loved, and she used to read at night whilst doing the ironing late at night. And so the story goes, she ended up at the Theosophical Society in Crotona, which I think is California, Hollywood, yeah. And I think it was in 1919 or so, she was sitting alone on a hill, and the Tibetan approached her, Dwal Kul. He, at that stage, was in a lamasery in Tibet, a very senior post, obviously. And he asked her, would she be willing to take down these books of esoteric philosophy and psychology, which were intended to help condition the thinking for the age which was to come. And she told him she wasn't interested in any psychic nonsense, and because he had approached her telepathically, obviously. And then he begged her to just take down one book and see its quality and see what she thought before rejecting him, which she did. That was Initiation, Human and Solar, I think. And from that, it started 30 years' work of these books. And, well, the titles are just so evocative. Yep. There's no sort of first book where you learn and then you get more and more difficult. They're just thrown in for people at a certain state of consciousness who are serious about spiritual training, or and really serious about the world and serving in the world in the deepest way they can. And yeah, shall I just give a list of some of the books?
Please.
Because it sort of gives the idea of the range, you know, everything from Discipleship in the New Age, so 2 volumes of meditation. And that was really, he chose a group of people that he was karmically related to. And Alice and Foster Bailey, her husband, were part of that group, but they didn't necessarily know each other. There were people around the world in this group who the Tibetan over the incarnations had a contact with. And it was an experiment to sort of externalize an inner ashram on the physical plane to see whether people are ready for a new type of discipleship, a more impersonal group consciousness type of approach. So that was his letters and his correspondence with those various people, plus in another section, very deep teachings on meditation. Then others were telepathy and the etheric vehicle. 5 books on the rays, which are 7 types of qualities of energies, which everybody is conditioned by. Their personalities, their mind might be on a different ray quality to the emotional body. It's very, every kingdom of nature has different rays, planets. So it's a very vast subject, and it constitutes esoteric psychology of the future in the Tibetans' eyes. So there was Esoteric Psychology 1 and 2, Cosmic Fire, The Laws of Thought, and which was the psychological key to the secret doctrine. Treatise on White Magic, which is a lovely book for the way of the disciple. It really is so good for this time now. Then he'll go to The Problems of Humanity, was a book on the major problems, the reappearance of the Christ. And that was the Christ is the God immanent in people, but he also said that because of the success of the World War, that it was won by the Allies at a very, very dangerous time for humanity, that the Christ took the decision to reappear. And now that people find that really difficult concept, but in fact, according to the Ages Wisdom teachings, he never went away. He has always been here, but not openly.
Right.
And so, it's such a vast field: esoteric healing, esoteric astrology, and the externalization of the hierarchy, which sort of gave a key to what was happening over the World War, and the giving out of the Great Invocation, which, according to Foster Bailey, was Alice's greatest achievement, how she had to align herself and so purely to be able to take that ancient and translated mantra down.
Right.
So a lot of the work that we use in meditations will always end with the Great Invocation. So that's just, there are other books, but those are the main books that I can think of at this time.
No, I appreciate you sort of going through that that spread of what these volumes encompass, and I'm glad you brought up the invocation, because I wanted to get into that next. And I actually, I've gone to the Apple store, and I've downloaded the weekly meditations, and they're very soothing and relaxing to listen to. The invocation, and I'd love to sort of start there, because and I don't know off the top of my head, but within the invocation that you mentioned, God is mentioned 3 times, so mind, heart, and will. And then, as you were saying, Christ is mentioned. And then there's sort of a footnote that you can substitute the Imam, you can substitute Bodhisattva from Buddhism, and so forth.
Yes.
A lot of our religions have somebody to come back. Talk about the invocation, if you will. It's sort of, all right, here I am, Jewish guy, people listening and so forth. I find sort of the meditations very soothing. Talk about, how I, from my religion or others, use the invocation, how it's used amongst your sort of population there, the group. And then if you could talk a little bit about the importance of meditation, because I think meditation, obviously, it goes back so far, but we're not just realizing the importance spiritually, but in today's world, as you're saying, there's a lot of upheaval. Meditation, very important for all of us, and they are very soothing. I do listen. I listen to them. Walk us through a little bit of some of these daily spiritual practices.
Sure. Well, for the invocation, it's really like a formula, an energy formula, and it's meant to ground the 7th ray of ceremonial order, which is the energy which is coming in to play now, and it's clashing with an outgoing energy, which dominated over the Piscean era, and that is a cause for a lot of the turmoil as well, that we're having to adjust to a totally different type of energy. It's such a big subject, I won't go into that, but there's a simplicity also to the Great Invocation, and I think they wanted people to intuitively sense the meaning behind it in its simplicity. I know using God, we basically often use planetary logos, but it was at that time, it was given out. God was acceptable as a term. And, there is a planetary God. It's a planetary being for every planet. So in that sense, it is true. It's the use of the word Christ, so we're evoking light, love, and spiritual power
Mhm.
Now, the spiritual power is probably what makes it different to a lot of other mantrams and prayers.
Okay.
And one of the newer teachings he introduced was Shambhala, which was a planetary head center.
Okay.
So where Sanat Kumara or planetary logos or God is located in consciousness terms, if you like.
Okay.
So it's a very powerful energy, that will energy, and it's that will that the Christ is going to bring when he reappears, and it'll burn away. It's a sort of fiery will to good. It's not a sort of gentle, soft spirituality in that sense. He's going to burn away those barriers that exist between people. And I think we're seeing it already, really. I mean, it is amazing the progress we're making despite the turmoil. We do have an adapted invocation where we don't mention Christ. It's the same, except we call, instead of saying the race of men, we say the human. We use the word human.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ we've called the coming one, just as a very broad brush. And it can actually be adapted according to an audience that's using it as well. The word, even the masters know and serve, you could say the disciple, or another term that you feel more comfortable with. But it is also quite a deep, great invocation in the sense that it talks about evil, and that's obviously the evil that we produce through illusion and glamour and everything, wrong thinking, wrong desire, and the mess that we've made in the world generally. There is such a thing as a sort of cosmic evil as well, but this is more directed to that evil and replacing it by bringing in light and love as real energies, illuminating energies, and love as an attractive and magnetic force, also as an impersonal energy that can be used and radiated into human consciousness. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody probably has a slightly different take on it, on the Great Invocation. I can understand from your point of view, being Jewish, to suddenly see the Christ there. But of course, he's not the Christ for Christians.
Sure.
We often call him a world teacher. And if he does reappear, he will come as a world teacher, and is very unlikely to be in terms of religion as such.
Gotcha.
Because it's a different world. It's a scientific world. Yeah. And he probably will choose an area where the greatest potential lies to take us forward and to offer new teachings. But that you either accept. I mean, some people find that difficult. The concept of reappearance,
Right.
But in that case, I just feel that talking about God immanent, Christ consciousness, if you like, which is group consciousness, it's accepting that we are all one on one level, is perhaps more acceptable to a lot of people.
Sure. No, while we're on this theme, and this is a more difficult question, and please, we can go any way you want with this one. So in my Old Testament, there is a shining one, and I remember in the Old Testament, if he, she, whatever is mentioned, the term Lucifer, but obviously this character in across texts, Sumerian, Babylonian, Roman mythology, Christian folklore, of course. Who is Lucifer? And in the context of the Shining One, Son of the Morning, all the different translations, weave that in here for a minute, because I just want people to understand that this is No, we're not talking about the devil or Satan or anything, but there
Yes.
was, there's a character that goes back in many different faiths,
Yeah.
known as Lucifer, that has a certain meaning. Talk about that, if you will.
Yes. I don't know why, but Alice Bailey, when she first moved to New York to start a publishing company in the Lucis Trust and a publishing company, she called it the
Right.
Lucifer Publishing Company,
Right.
which, with her Christian background, is quite strange to me why she did that, because obviously it would have quite a strong reaction. But I think she, like Madame Blavatsky before her, wanted to redeem the name, so to speak, because, and this now goes back into esoteric history, which you either accept or not, but the Earth being a non-sacred planet, aeons back, we were just sort of animal men. They hardly men even, we weren't literally animals. And in order to help this evolution of this planet, Venus, which is a sacred planet, very much associated with the Earth, chose to send solar angels, as they called them, which I think link into the fallen angels in the Bible and perhaps in the Jewish teaching, I'm not sure. And they were fallen in the sense that they simply came down, they descended to Earth in order to bring light and to implant the seed of mind. And that was the beginning of self-consciousness and a long, long road of evolution. But without that happening, I presume nothing much would have happened. So, and that also kickstarted the idea of initiation, which is a process of moving on human consciousness as well. But I don't think, perhaps it's not necessary to go into that. But so Lucifer is actually Latin, drawn from lux, lucis meaning light, and fera to bring. So Lucifer was a light bringer or a light bearer. And basically, he in many ways represents humanity, whose destiny in the Ages Wisdom teachings is meant to be a planetary light, being a planetary outpost of light in our solar system, which is a lovely long-term thing to look forward to. And all of the suffering on this planet, and I think Mars as well, are the only two, this is also a non-sacred planet. The other planetary evolutions don't have the sort of pain and suffering and conflict that we do. But on another level, it means a rapid evolution, and through it all, an opportunity to progress spiritually and to give something back. I mean, these are strange comments for some people, I'm sure, but that is just part of the esoteric history that is given in the Ages Wisdom.
Absolutely.
So it was just a redemption really of the name, but after 2 years she changed it to Lucis Publishing Company.
Right.
But as you say, it's lived on for only 2 years. It's lived on forever.
So, Christine, Lucis Trust has both consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, and then World Goodwill, which is a component of the programs there, recognized Department of Public Information, the United Nations non-governmental organization. And we've talked a little bit on the show. We actually just did a show a couple weeks ago with Bawa Jain, who actually connected me a couple weeks ago to the Clinton Foundation, had a sort of symposium on the importance of faith, faith leaders in, of all things, the opioid crisis that we're having, and sort of the importance of different spiritual practices, once again, in some of these intractable problems that we seem to be having. The Lucis Trust, actively involved with the, cooperation, service programs, goodwill. It's mentioned on the site as sort of this core spiritual concept that we take for granted in a way, but it's just so important. And as you're saying, connecting us all. Talk a little bit about sort of the Lucis Trust from the perspective of how you are using some of the spiritual themes there in terms of addressing some of these sort of real world areas that we have major problems in, and we really need this faith, spiritual, esoteric component, let's say, to help solve them. And technology alone ain't going to get it done.
Well, mainly, I would say it's what we do for the UN is just educational, but it's important. Here in the UK, we hardly hear anything about the UN, and the good side of all the things that does. You often hear a few bad things,
right?
When things go wrong. But so that educational, keeping a spotlight on the wonderful programs that the UN does, we will bring it through our newsletters, our documentation, in our World Goodwill seminars and webinars, and support. It's really difficult task. And some people seem to think it's like, oh, the UN did that. But the UN is just us. It's just humanity, right, and the nations, and so I think that side of it is important. We do, through Geneva and New York, where the UN is based in both of those cities, attend meetings from time to time. And there's a spiritual caucus, I think, in New York, of just a small group of people who support it in meditation. But of course, they're not God, and religion or spirituality is not used in a sort of dogmatic way or in theories, just literally in practice of service. And the best way for us to do that is educational. We have a UN World Goodwill at the UN blog, and we highlight certain things that we feel are, need to be shown to our co-workers and to anyone else who comes on the site. Because although they're happening and anyone can get on the internet and find things, there's so much, isn't there, that, selecting particularly useful areas of work is a good thing to do, really.
What, you and I chatted a little bit before about the role of sort of technology in spiritual practice, and obviously we're not going to get into sort of details of some of these sciences, but there, you do have components on the Lucis website about technology and looking the future, and you talk about some very timely things. We've talked about the cosmological already, but there's writings in terms of biomimicry and the sort of learning from nature and the world around us, which we think of the natural world as this ancient thing, but we're learning so much from it, whether there be how a hummingbird flies, or the bioelectric potential of our bodies. We're much more than just our DNA and so forth. Let's not get into science and tech, but talk a little bit about sort of Lucis' view, because you do have a lot of lecturers come in, talk about these different topics. Just roll that up for us in a little nutshell of sort of the perspective from the Lucis Trust on where technology and some of these more futuristic concepts merge with spiritual practice.
Yeah, that is very tricky. I mean, obviously, it's a wonderful tool. We all know that, especially now after COVID. And it's like everything, isn't it? It's that path of discernment and discrimination that you have to take at every step of the way, and not just find yourself into a very difficult situation. And I know there's a lot of talk going on at the moment of people imagining a new world, which is what all of us are really trying to do. It's a lovely expression. But some people have pointed out that those doing the imagining are still in their old mindset. I mean, it's hard to move out of the thoughts that you've always been guided by. you know, the illusions and the separations and the materialism that you just think, well, this system of capitalism or materialism, it's just the way it is, you know. But there's always a new materialism and a new way of looking at things. So I think there's a potential for a lot of danger, really, with biology as well. And that's been looked at. I'm actually starting to look at that now, but I haven't gone into it enough to really want to talk about it.
Sure.
But, you know, it's lovely that these incredible thinkers, what the Tibetan maybe would call the new group of world servers, they are tapping into ideas, they're thinking for themselves, they're not just reflecting what everyone's thought of for years and years. But from our perspective, humanity is destined to be a planetary steward, really. So in that sense, you know, you hear a lot of people after COVID saying, oh, we mustn't interfere with nature, leave it alone. Well, in many ways, we should interfere with it because we can bring something to it. We're sort of like the god of the lower kingdoms of nature, if you like. And so there is that way of looking at things. And when we start to do that is a dangerous point, and how we start to do that, working with nature and remodeling it to fit ourselves, rather than designing environments, for instance, that nature is happy with and is right for them. So it's a very fine line, all of these things. And I think we could burn our fingers if we don't think first, and we just, because we've got so much capacity now and capability. It's brilliant, you know, with AI and all of these things. But as I'm sure you worry about too, there's an ethical dimension to all of this.
Absolutely.
A
big one.
Yeah. Perhaps another way of talking about how different things are is cosmology.
Yep.
Where there's all this talk about the Big Bang and dark matter and
inflation.
Instead of looking at, which is based on Newton's law of gravity, basically.
Yep.
And when you look at how harmonious the universe is and how ordered it is, and the whole basis of how it works, gravity is too weak a force to be considered.
Yeah.
And we very much follow the Thunderbolts. I don't know if you know of them, thunderbolts.info.
Yep.
So their electric view of the universe ties in quite well with esoteric teachings on electricity. Fire by friction, solar fire, and electric fire.
Yep.
The different stages of matter, soul, and spirit. And so that's quite a difference. And we've got the electric bridge on our site, which goes into some of those issues. But it's not important, but I think we are moving into an age of electricity, new energy, free energy, and we do need to step outside those paradigms.
It's actually pretty important, I think, just because not on this a previous platform, I actually, there's a group of what we'll call sort of multiverse cosmologists out there that they spend their time thinking a lot about what the cosmos thinks about, and the complexity of what's out there is millions of times more complex than the electrical stuff that goes on in here. And when you see these people that specialize in whatever these themes, I mean, you're saying dark matter and multiverses and all that, start also thinking about consciousness and the mind and the similarities between this electrical thing here and that electrical thing out there. No, I think it's pretty relevant. I think it makes a lot of there's a lot of interesting connections, not just biologic to cosmologic, but spiritual, and there's some interesting stuff there.
I know it's fascinating time.
Yeah.
I realize I didn't really answer your question about meditation earlier.
Go for it.
I just wanted to say that everything obviously is energy and forces, as science has now found out, and esoteric teachings have always acknowledged.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about meditation, we are working with energies and applying them. And when we apply them, they become a force.
Mm-hmm.
And our sort of meditation practices, whether it's triangles or networks of light that we form, or world goodwill, or the school, it's all based on some form of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And the consciousness side, because really that's where we're headed. We have a lot of knowledge and
Right.
a lot of intelligence, and we need to link it now to the consciousness or the love aspect, not meaning that in a sentimental sense, of course, the magnetic and attractive force of the universe. And so it's for us, meditation isn't passive or particularly peaceful. It's it's a bridging of the mind, stilling the mind, but it's not emptying it in the sense of being passive and open.
Got it.
It's a bridging process to a higher dimension, and obviously it's a long work. It's not something you just do.
Right.
It is a creation of a bridge from the lower mind to the higher, if you like.
Yep.
That is very much part of our work.
I appreciate you sharing that. Christine, we talked about obviously the volumes, and you can purchase them on the site. There's also the app or the podcast, and people can participate in that. I think you release that on a weekly basis. Talk about the reading rooms, though. Because I know you're in the UK, but I think you have a reading room in New York as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How does that? I mean, I can't just come by and hang out and read. I can.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
We'd love to see you.
Okay. I just didn't know if I have to make an appointment or what typically happens.
In office hours, you can do. No?
Okay.
Yeah. We've sort of stopped making it a library where we post our books.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, it just doesn't seem to work much in the postal system of these times. And so, we've got such a rich resource of books, just to hide them away for ourselves. So we do offer, them to people to come in and take a look. Because there's lots of areas from yoga to, lots of esoteric teachers.
Yeah. What anything obviously we're all emerging from the pandemic now, but any major media? I know there's a World Goodwill thing coming up, I thought.
Yes.
But any other big conferences or things you're putting? Anything else you want to talk about that's happening either later in the year or coming up next year that's planned? Please take the floor.
Well, we have a fairly regular rhythm. We've just finished our Arcane School conference in all 3 centers, and that was over 3 days each. So that's our really big conference. We have World Goodwill, I think it's on the 6th of November. And that will be, it's sort of a more applied, we get people from around the world. It depends on the topic. And with Zoom, of course, it's easier to get speakers, which is wonderful, and, so we just keep the focus on goodwill as an energy, not as some nebulous quality, but on an energy that can be used to ignite the world. If we introduce it into any conflict situation, if you have goodwill, it can work. It's difficult. I'm sure they try that at the UN, but we have Triangles webinars every Monday. We have World Goodwill webinar on the last Wednesday of every month. And myself and Lawrence Newey of the Lucis Trust, we have Lucis Trust webinars twice or three times a year.
Okay.
I mean, we had one on humanity and the new fire, which was talking about the new types of energy that are being used. And so it's, those are our main issues, really, the main sort of meetings that we put forward.
Excellent. Excellent.
We are actually quite small in our 3 centers, our headquarters, in terms of staff. So, we're constantly trying to say, well, what is needed most, and running the school as well. So it is very dynamic in every sense.
Imagine. It's a fascinating story, and we started off talking about things that were esoteric and were difficult to be understood, but you made things very understandable, and I appreciate that. Really, wishing you the best with all of this, and obviously you have a lot on your plate, but it's exciting times.
Good thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
I think perhaps the most exciting thing is that discipleship as such, which used to belong to a religion and a strict discipline, working through a priest or whatever, discipleship now is all of humanity in many ways. And that is just really exciting and going to speed up change, the development and evolution of consciousness, because you can see people are taking responsibility, they're beginning to think, they are stepping onto a path. And discipleship is every field, really. It's not religion or spirituality. It can be everywhere and is everywhere. Medicine, science, and it's a very exciting period, despite what you read in the papers. And they're true as well, and obviously they have to be addressed, but there is another side to things.
Absolutely. Very important message there, most definitely. Really, really fascinating. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode of the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Christine Morgan, Chair and President of the Lucis Trust, doing really important things to promote the education of the human mind, recognition and practice of spiritual principles, and ultimately impacting a better, more stable, interdependent world. Christy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule today to talk to us. Thanks for what you're doing. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. It's very, very interesting and inspiring stuff.
Thank you, Ira. And all the best for your website as well, and all the work you're doing to bring attention to all of these projects.